as a little introduction for any of the viewers, this is a follow-up to last week's Learn and Solve with PwC, in which you talked about the Digital Accelerators program at PwC, which I think many people would probably understand, will recognise the term digital champions. And so it's a sort of similar project, although I think that probably undersells the sort of the breadth and the influence of digital accelerators within PwC from the sounds of the way you were talking about the program last week. And if anybody hasn't watched or wasn't able to attend last week's Learn and Solve, the recording is available. So please, anybody watching, do go and watch that full session. It was incredibly incisive and informative and really revealing about the development, the rationale and the impact of digital accelerators at PwC. But what we didn't have time to do was do any Q&A with Sunil after the fact. So we've collected some questions from the chat panel on the day and from the Future.Now, and Sunil has very kindly agreed to answer some of these questions. And so one of the questions that came up a couple of times in a couple of different ways were when you were developing the rationale for the business case, I guess, for the Digital Accelerators program, how did you identify those skill gaps that required the program? What process did you go through to assess the current skills levels within the organization and then identify the gaps therein?
Yeah, Chris. So yeah, thanks for having me back. I think in terms of that question, we didn't actually identify skills gaps. That's not where we started. Okay. So this program was very much part of our broader transformation program. And so we were really looking at where we wanted to be in the future. And we really wanted to be a really digitally confident organization. And so we looked at what did that mean to us? What is it we'd be doing in the future that we weren't doing now? And I think we sort of looked at sort of broad areas in terms of our firm, in terms of where we wanted to invest and position ourselves. So to give you an example, we wanted more of our people to be confident using data and working with data going forward, just as a more sort of broad brush statement. We also wanted ourselves to be much more comfortable using automation and other technologies in terms of our work and so forth. So we had some broad brush statements about how we wanted to use technology and digital in our organization in the future, which drove our program and drove the direction of which Digital Accelerators went. So our program didn't arise because we looked at our current workforce and said they had deficits, because we all have deficits and and we'll always have deficits. Sure. Our program was very much sort of future oriented, going, where do we want to be as an organization? What are the big sort of trends or positions that we want to take, whether it's around data, AI, automation, digital, whatever those topics might be that we want to be more comfortable and confident in. And then using our digital accelerators was, as I said last week, the sort of the mechanism to move from where we are to where we wanted to be. Yeah,
that makes a huge amount of sense. So actually, there's a certain level of assumption that because I suppose of the speed of change and speed of transformation when it comes to technology and the impact of new technologies and the potential application, there's an assumption then that there's inevitably going to be a certain degree of a skills deficit there, just because we can't possibly keep up to pace constantly. Yeah.
So this was very much a sort of, as I said last week, sort of how do we create the learning organization that keeps learning and developing to keep us moving forward. Now, when we started the program, it was certain things, but each year and every other year we review the program and we add other things to the program. So it's very much about a sort of continual program that runs around our overall digital upskilling.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that it comes very much from sort of business needs first, I guess, rather. There's a lot of talk about digital skills gap at the moment and identifying skills deficits, and there isn't the workforce out there. So, but actually it came from a really different place about actually where do we want to go as a business? What are our goals? What are our objectives? And what do we need to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's very much, future oriented and working backwards from there. How do we get there, basically?
And I suppose that actually might in part ways answer my next question, which came from somebody in the chat last week, was about where the champions for the program were within the business? Was this HR and learning and development led, like it might be in many organizations, or did the impetus come from elsewhere?
No, so it was very much run from the board as a strategic transformation program, an upskilling program. And I've involved all of our businesses and learning and development and HR and operations and so forth, as you'd imagine. So it involved all of our functions, but it wasn't run by HR, it wasn't run by L&D, it was run really as a business program around upskilling, sponsored by the board. And I led that program. And in a way, my three sponsors were the head of people on the board, head of operations, and also our head of sort of clients and markets, because we also wanted to make a difference in terms of our impact on clients and markets. So we had sort of multiple sponsors at the board. They were all getting something different out of the program in different ways, but it was very much a business-led sort of an endorsed program.
And I suppose that's a great example of how crucial it is to have the most senior level buy-in for this kind of upskilling operation for any business and any size of organization. It really needs to have that level of investment at the top, doesn't it, to make sure it's sort of successful and really sort of reaches its full potential.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And starting there, so in fact, actually, our upskilling started with the board, because I think I sort of mentioned to you last week that if they weren't going to invest in this, as you come lower down into the organization, people are going to look up and go, well, they haven't done it, why should I do it? Or why should I sort of lean into this? So actually, we started by actually upskilling our board and our partnership first, to make sure that when other layers of our organization got upskilled, and our partners and leaders could actually endorse that and support them and actually help them have the time off to go and do the training they needed and support the training. So actually, it was very much a top-down program in terms of endorsement and sponsorship, and not just in terms of budget and signing off the business case, actually in terms of actual execution as well. They were involved in part of the execution to show that it is a serious thing that we're doing and driving it into local business units.
So it's beyond senior buying, isn't it? It's really leading by example.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thinking a little bit further ahead then, once you'd implemented the Digital Accelerators program, how did, sort of in terms of the practicalities, how did the accelerators start to really actively shift behaviour and make an impact sort of beyond the accelerators program across the wider business, across different teams?
Yeah, so Chris, it took them a while, if I'm honest, to start sort of enacting their role, because obviously they're going through their own sort of journey in terms of training and upskilling, and then they come back to their local teams and they feel a little bit different to everybody else because they've had this investment, and obviously the rest of the team hasn't had as much of the investment. So it took them a while to sort of find their feet. And what we found was the way that we effected the wider change was that we connected all the digital accelerators up into a community. So we also ran a digital accelerator community. So the community was 200, 250 people. And we connected them up and gave them a space, a collaboration space. So actually they started sharing sort of challenges, frustrations, opportunities in their community. And obviously we could see that as well. And so, management or leadership could intervene if there was a real problem on something, but equally they could see what others were doing and what was working, and then they would sort of cascade that and try that in their teams. So my sense is building that community helped them drive their confidence, drive their individual sort of motivation, gave them some incentives. And then that started to have an effect in their local teams. So to give you an example, if one team had said, look, I've started doing sort of learning sessions at lunchtime for my team to explain how to do this or how to do this better, then that idea would ripple through the community. And then, oh, okay, I could do that. I could use the same material. And they started collaborating like that. And so then it became easier for someone else to offer to do that in their teams. If someone had built something or developed something in one area, that did something, they would share that on the community, and then other people could take that forward into their teams. So slightly more community-based sharing drove the impact across the organization, because things that were seeded in one place ended up in other places.
Great, that makes perfect sense. And actually, the example you used there of this sort of as in a slightly hypothetical way, but of a lunchtime learning session, was it those kinds of sort of that sort of group learning that actually was in practice drove increased digital capability beyond the digital accelerators into the wider team, that sort of shared learning?
Yeah, I think there were several areas in which drove the sort of the broader impact across the rest of the team. I think, but accelerators would sort of, I suppose, lead on local learning, let's say. So lunch and learns, it might be hands-on learning, like, you're sitting next to someone and they can see someone trying to do something with maybe Excel or whatever they're trying to do. And they'd go, well, look, there's a better way of doing that. I'll show you how to do it. So they could do that, it could be hands-on. Reverse mentoring. So each of the accelerators could also reverse mentor more senior people or other people in the team. So what we found is once they had those skills, other people would reach out to them and say, can you come and spend an hour with me? And I've never really understood how to make this thing work, or I've never really understood how to use that system that we've got, or whatever it might be. So reverse mentoring helped a bit. And generally what happened is, you get to a tipping point in a team, depending on the size of the team, where if enough people are doing something in a different way, more, it sort of becomes like the norm, and more, it becomes like sort of accepted. At the start, it's very difficult because you've got one or two people doing things differently to everybody else, and they feel the exception. But as that spread, you got to a tipping point where everyone's saying, well, we should be doing it like that, so let's re-engineer that like that, and that's how process change happened, and slightly some of the cultural change happened. So it did take time, as I said, but certainly, the accelerators needed support, a lot of support in year one, but in year two they were really up and running and rolling things out across their teams, and we're driving that broader impact.
And I mean, you talk about year one and year two, and it goes to show that sort of that cultural shift is not, there's no quick fix for that, is there? It requires investment, and it requires giving people the time to really sort of start to try to change behavior and try to sort of build relationships, I guess, is a part of it, and have that influence within their teams.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and it takes time, and it was always, I think we always saw it as a 2-year cycle. 1 year of investing in the individuals to build their skills and confidence, and give them the sort of elevated level of training. And then we saw the second year being the application year, the year where they apply that skill to their teams. But we actually found in the second year, within 6 months, there had been such a big change.
Oh, right, okay.
Across the, so I think originally we'd framed the business case as a 2-year business case, but actually after 18 months, we had found significant ROI, because it was sort of let's say a year of investment, but 6 months of sort of payback had already delivered what we were expecting. And as I mentioned in the video last week, quite a lot of areas where there were unintended benefits that we hadn't foreseen.
And I think you mentioned as well last week that the success of the program has led to it go beyond that initial 2 years as well.
Yeah, no. So we're now in our, I think I'm right, probably in our 4th year now.
Yeah.
So we now just roll it forward from 2 perspectives. We asked the businesses, do you want to continue with the program? And at the start they were like, let's do this for 2 years and we'll see. But now they're like, yeah, absolutely. Each year we want to have another 30 or 40 people going through the accelerator program in their areas. So they want to keep a regular cycle, because I think the benefit is also the digital accelerators, some of them are quite junior, and they're also progressing through the organization. So they're getting promoted to maybe manager or senior manager. So that's creating a more cultural change as well.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is what we touched on earlier, which is technologies keep moving. So our curriculum for this year's accelerators will be different to what we did 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So again, we can sort of go, where do we want our business to focus now in the future? And we can influence that in their training curriculum going forwards.
Yeah, fantastic. My next question is from the chat panel from the event last week, and it's really specific about the process of setting up the program, I guess. And so the question is, how did people who were on the program sort of manage their time to take part in the training and do their digital accelerator activity? So was that simply sort of a bolt-on to their day job, and was it extracurricular, or were they given really dedicated time to sort of invest in their digital accelerator training and activities?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and one at the start that we struggled with, because we didn't really know, what time would be needed and how our accelerators would feel. It wasn't like a very scientific process to go, it's X hours a week or whatever it was. But we found within a few months that the accelerators on that community that I mentioned were talking to us about the fact they weren't being able to keep up with their training. So they have certain checkpoints every couple of months, and we could see like the number of people that were getting through those checkpoints, and we could see the numbers were sort of starting to tail off a little bit. And that's because people, and then we asked them, why is that? And they said, look, well, I've just not had a chance to do the training or commit the time that I need to do for self-study or whatever. So we actually dealt with that quite quickly. So we ended up sort of basically framing it as it was broadly 15 to 20% of an accelerator's time a week.
Right.
That we wanted them to focus on accelerator role, let's say. So that could be learning, it could be sort of coaching from others and self-study and etc. So we mandated that. We protected that time. Now, different business units protected that time in different ways. So some business units who are very busy said, look, we can't allow people to do that each week.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually blocked out certain key weeks for their accelerators where they would do all their training and learning. So some people, I remember a couple of years ago, blocked out a week either side of Christmas, and they gave the accelerators that time to just get some of their training done. Other business units who are a little bit more in a steady mode actually said basically you can have Friday afternoons or Fridays to do the digital accelerator role. So depending on the business and the situation they're in, they carved out the time in different ways. But we ended up broadly with 15 to 20% of the time going into the program. And that did need an intervention. You're absolutely right, Chris, because if we didn't make that intervention, it was quite easy for it to be skipped or missed. Or managers to go, well, we're really busy, can you not do that this week, etc. And we wanted to protect that all the way through. So that was a pretty hard message we gave up all the way through the organization, also for our managers and leaders, that we needed their support to allow people to partake in the training.
And it's another indication of how important that sort of the top-down structure of the whole program was, making sure it was really clear to everyone at every level that this is sort of
exactly
an order coming from on high, if you like. But really,
but also the value in it as well. The value, I think, at the start it's hard to see the value because it's a lot of input. But as I said, sort of after a number of months, we could start seeing the value and coming out. And we reached that tipping point. So after that, it became easier. And as I said, now they want more of the program. But the first number of months are quite difficult because it is an investment at that stage.
Lovely. And that actually, it does speak a little bit to my final question, which is around resistance, really, and pushback, and whether there was any sort of institutionally and organizationally about this kind of transformation and this kind of refocusing of the quite a significant amount of resource, really, and whether there was any real resistance and how you responded to that.
Yeah, I think I think at the start there was quite a lot of cynicism, I would say. I wouldn't say it's resistance. I think cynicism about how's this going to work, and where's the value in it for my business unit or whatever. Because it could look like it's a program from, as you said, upon high that's coming down, to local teams or local management. So a bit of cynicism about how it works, but I think the part of the way of getting around that is that there was an accelerator in every area and every team. So it wasn't like some people missed out. Everyone got something, and you were involved in selecting that person, as I mentioned. How we selected that person, who they were selected to be. Their role was defined differently. Their performance was going to be assessed differently that first year, etc., etc. So we had all those things built in through our model. So it wasn't like they were, they were really being supported. And then I think the resistance came a little bit just like what we talked about, the time allocation. So there was a bit of resistance around the time allocation, as you'd expect. People are busy. Oh, we haven't factored in that 15% or the 20%. But we made, as I said, we made that work, because actually what we found is by spending that 15-20%, you were going to get back a lot more than that in save time and efficiency across the broader team.
Yeah.
And through upskilling and efficiency and improvement. But it was just, you didn't see that in the first number of months, obviously, because it takes a while to get that program mobilizing and running. So we had to hold our nerve, I would say, at the start to make sure that, we continued the direction of the program. And I think what we also benefited from, Chris, is our accelerators were all at different levels. So when you look at the training journey, there's a year's training journey that they all had to go through. Yeah. But some people walked through that journey in 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Because they were slightly more proficient at the start.
Yeah.
And some people took 12 months, and that's okay. So actually the people who got through it quicker actually started delivering results for us earlier than some others. And so we could point to certain areas in the business going, well, look, they're already delivering these results over here. You will get those when you're, so actually continue supporting your accelerator to get through the training, and you're going to get some of that.
Yeah.
So it sort of became a sort of a joint effort, really. I think, to where there was resistance, we sort of, that there is something in it for those business teams, and we just had to explain how they could deliver that value.
Perfect. And you mentioned there the different levels of proficiency at the start of the program, and you mentioned last week that an existing level of proficiency wasn't necessarily a really important criteria when selecting your digital accelerators. Is that right?
That's right. So it wasn't a prerequisite. We picked people based on their learning agility and mindset.
Yeah. Now
that means it could be anybody. It could be someone that's highly technically literate, or actually not technically literate at all.
Yeah.
So we just looked at learning and growth mindset sort of characteristics when we did the assessment of the applications. And in a way, like I said last week, we didn't want the digital dennies per se, because they would get the least out of it, if you're honest, because they would all go, I know that, I know that, I know that. And actually this was, as well as being a digital upskilling program, it was actually quite a big cultural change management, how to deal with resistance, like the question you just asked me, how to deal with resistance, because they would all find local resistance in their teams. So, they needed to be equipped to deal with local resistance. How do you influence people to change their behavior? If they've done something the same way for many, many years, why would they try to do something a different way? And if you're going to suggest something different to them. So they, as well as some of the technical training, they were also equipped in some of the soft skills in terms of influence, dealing with resistance and pushback.
Yeah.
How do you speak up in a group when maybe you're not the most senior person, or you don't have the role to speak up? So we gave them some of those other softer skills to help that role sort of flourish a little bit in the local teams.
Wonderful. Sunil, thank you so much for finding the time to answer the questions. I could keep talking about this for hours. I think it's a really fascinating program, and one that the Future.Now Coalition can learn so much from. So thank you for making sure that we're squeezing as much of that learning out of the program as possible. So thank you very much. And for anybody else who's listening, the Learn and Solve series will continue throughout 2022 into 2023. So please do join future sessions, or keep an eye out for these recordings. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.